It was a bright morning on October 12, 1492. On the azure waters of the Caribbean, peace and nature reigned as far as the eye could see. But something appeared on the horizon that would forever change time for the civilization living on the shore. Three strange, gigantic ships, their sails swollen with wind. These floating wooden fortresses were slowly approaching the shore. For the native inhabitants standing on the beach, whom we know today as the Taino, it was an unbelievable, a mind-boggling sight. Their generations had never seen such a thing.
Their small boats, which they made by hollowing out tree trunks, were insignificant in front of these floating mountains. For them, it was as if the sky itself had descended upon the earth, or the sea gods had come to meet them on their mounts. It was some supernatural creature entering their world. Aboard these ships were Christopher Columbus and his sailors, who, after a months-long, grueling and uncertain journey, had reached a land they themselves could not have imagined. This was Europe's first official arrival in the New World. This first contact, this first encounter, is one of those few moments in history that changed the map of the world and the future of humanity forever. The astonishment of the native inhabitants, that sense of strangeness, is all understandable. In their world, metal was virtually non-existent. Their weapons were made of wood and stone. They had never seen clothes like those worn by Columbus and his companions, nor such beards nor their language. And above all, they had those shining swords and guns which were no less than magic for the Taino people.
Today, in the light of history books and Columbus's own diary, we'll try to find out what actually happened during this first contact. What expectations were in Columbus's mind? How was his interaction with the local people? And above all, that eternal search for gold, the obsession that gave this entire expedition a direction whose effects are felt to this day. We will tell you all this in today's episode on American history. But before that, please subscribe to our channel.
The first scene of this historical drama began on an island in the Bahamas. As soon as Columbus set foot on his land, he named it San Salvador, meaning Holy Savior, because the discovery of this island had saved his expedition from the brink of failure. But the island had its own name, which its original inhabitants had been using for centuries, Guanahani. It was not a very large island, about 21 kilometers long and 8 kilometers wide, but it was rich in natural beauty. At that time, it was covered with dense forests, saltwater lakes, and small green hills.
An interesting theory is that the name Guanahani was related to the iguana, an animal that was perhaps found in abundance on the island. Sadly, today that iguana has disappeared from there, just as the original inhabitants and their culture have also vanished. On the morning of October 12, when these ships anchored near the shore, a sudden commotion erupted on the beach. The news spread like wildfire. People left their work and ran towards the sea. They didn't just stand and watch from a distance. Curiosity got the better of them. Some fearless young men swam towards these floating wonders, while others got into their small boats, called canoes, and came closer. Their faces showed a unique mixture of wonder and innocence. They were looking at these ships, the strange humans standing on them, and their waving flags as if they were truly creatures from another world. Their own way of life was extremely simple. They lived in huts made of thatch and wood. Depending on the weather, the custom of wearing clothes was almost non-existent among them.
Their staple food was corn, sweet potatoes, and cassava, which they cultivated themselves. They did not have metal tools or weapons. Their world was unfamiliar with the hardness of iron and steel. Then the moment came when Columbus landed on the shore in a small boat with a few of his armed companions. Instead of running away in fear, the local people came forward to welcome him. The first encounter was surprisingly peaceful. Soon, an exchange of gifts began. A seemingly friendly and pleasant atmosphere was created.
The local people gave Columbus and his companions fresh water to drink and fruits to eat. They presented the most beautiful and precious gifts of their island, colorful parrots. On the other hand, Columbus gave them cheap items brought from Europe, red-colored caps, strings of glass beads, and small brass bells. Sources say that the local people were as happy and amazed as children upon hearing the sweet sound of these bells. For them, this sound was a new and magical thing.
But behind this friendly atmosphere, these smiles, and the exchange of gifts, what was going on in Columbus's mind? Was he merely delighted in the joy of discovering a new land? The matter here is much more complex and deep. The accounts of the famous 14th century traveler Marco Polo's journeys had a profound impression on Columbus's mind. The tales Marco Polo had written about the wealth of China, which he called Cathay, and Japan, which he called Sapangu, were legendary in Europe. Stories of palaces with roofs made of gold, heaps of spices, and immense wealth.
Columbus's primary goal was to find a new and shorter route to Asia by traveling west and to gain access to these rich regions. So what did he see on San Salvador that raised his hopes? He saw that the people of the island were very simple. They had no large cities or magnificent palaces, but he saw small gold earrings in the noses of some of the local people.
Just this small sign was enough for him.
Just by seeing those few earrings, he immediately became convinced that he was on an island near Cipangu, Japan, because Marco Polo had written that around Cipangu were hundreds of small islands where gold was found. For Columbus, these earrings were concrete proof that he was on the right path and that great treasures of wealth were just a few steps away. A few earrings determined his entire thinking and future course of action. The opinion he formed about the local people is preserved in the pages of his diary. Was he considering them friends or future trading partners? The picture that emerges from his writings is completely different and duplicitous. On one hand, he praises their simplicity and hospitality, but in the very next line he writes that the people of San Salvador and the surrounding islands walk around almost naked. They have no weapons like iron or steel, they do not know how to fight and are very cowardly. He even went so far as to write that, with only 50 armed men, all of them could be subjugated and made to do whatever one wants. This was a frightening thought. On one side, friendship and the exchange of gifts, and on the other, plans to enslave and crush them. This was the mentality of the European colonial powers of that time, which saw newly discovered lands merely as a source of resources and human slaves. But he also noted another of their qualities – their generosity. Columbus writes with astonishment in his diary, "These people are so generous with their possessions that it is unbelievable. Whatever you ask of them, they give it immediately and never refuse."
But alas, Columbus and his companions mistook this simplicity and generosity for their weakness. In the frenzy of their search for gold, they would brazenly enter their huts, rummaging through their belongings to see if gold was hidden somewhere. The local people were both surprised and troubled to see all this, but sources say they still welcomed them. Perhaps they could not understand what these heavenly guests wanted and what their true intentions were.
But apart from those few earrings, no more gold was found on San Salvador. When Columbus became convinced that the treasure he was looking for was not here, he decided to move on. His target was still the same, Cipangu and Cathay. But before leaving, he did something that would prove to be the starting point of a long saga of oppression and exploitation in the days to come. He forcibly captured 6 native inhabitants from the island and imprisoned them on the ship.
His plan was to teach them the Spanish language and use them as guides. He wanted these people to show him the way to the land of gold, Cipangu and China. He was certain they must know. But the tragedy was that these poor souls had never even heard the names of these places. Columbus kept asking about gold and some great empire through gestures. The native prisoners guessed from his gestures that he was perhaps talking about a large nearby island that they knew of.
So they pointed towards that large island, which is, in fact, modern-day Cuba. Thus, Columbus set off for Cuba, thinking he was approaching the land of Japan or China. On October 28, 1492, he landed on the coast of Cuba. At first, he thought that perhaps this was Cipangu or the mainland of China. Here, too, he began searching for the magnificent cities, pagodas, and golden palaces described by Marco Polo. He sent 2 of his men inland to meet the local king.
But when they returned, they reported that there were no cities of gold, but rather villages consisting of thatched huts, and the people rolled up a strange dry leaf, set it on fire, and smoked it. This was Europe's first introduction to tobacco. Here, too, the coastal people had the same ordinary gold earrings and nothing special. This left Columbus severely disappointed. Perhaps this was the first time he began to doubt the truth of Marco Polo's words. He started to wonder, had Marco Polo written lies?
In this state of disappointment, on December 5th, he set sail from Cuba towards another island, still in search of a mythical city. And then, as fate would have it, winds from the opposite direction blew his ships towards another large island, about 100 kilometers east of Cuba. On December 6th, he reached this island. The local people called it Haiti, meaning mountainous land. Columbus named it La Española, meaning the Spanish island, which later was corrupted to Hispaniola.
Today, this island is home to 2 countries, the Dominican Republic and Haiti. It is the second largest island in the West Indies.
When Columbus arrived, there was a large and prosperous population of Taino people of Arawak descent. They also welcomed Columbus and his companions very warmly. The same friendly attitude, the same exchange of gifts, but upon reaching Hispaniola, Columbus's hopes were rekindled. Here, he saw more gold among the local people compared to San Salvador and Cuba. Then a local chief, whom they called a cacique, gifted Columbus a mask made of gold. Seeing these things, Columbus's impatience grew. He became firmly convinced that there was a lot of gold here and that these local people knew where to find it. Some of Columbus's religious ideas are also mentioned here. Since he was very religious, he also began to think that perhaps Hispaniola was the biblical region of Ophir, from where gold was brought for King Solomon.
He seemed to think that no world could exist outside the stories of the Bible. So he was trying to fit every new thing into his old religious and geographical picture. The reality was that with the technology of that time, it was not possible to extract gold on a large scale from there. The gold that existed was mostly in the form of fine particles in river sand, which the local people laboriously sifted and collected. It was not a wealth that could be obtained instantly.
Although today we know that Hispaniola is rich in minerals, in the Haitian part alone reserves of gold, silver, and copper worth billions of dollars have been estimated. But in the 15th century, reaching these reserves was impossible. During this time, some incidents of deteriorating relations with the local people also occurred. There is mention of a skirmish in which Columbus's crew killed 2 local men simply because they refused to hand over their bows and arrows at the Europeans' command. But no major conflict had occurred up to that point.
The reason for this was an accident. It was Christmas Day, December 25, 1492. Columbus's largest ship, the Santa Maria, ran aground on a reef near the coast of Hispaniola at night. The waves damaged it so much that the ship became completely useless. Now he was left with only 2 smaller ships, the Niña and the Pinta. The entire crew could not return to Spain on these 2 small ships. There was not enough space. Columbus's solution to this problem was to build a fort on the shore using the broken parts of the Santa Maria.
He named this fort La Navidad, meaning Christmas, because it was built from the timber of the ship that was wrecked on Christmas Day. Columbus decided to leave about 39 of his companions there, with strict instructions to maintain good relations with the local people, continue the search for gold, and find out where the gold mines were. This was the first European settlement or military outpost in the New World. After building the fort, on January 16, 1493, Columbus set sail for Spain aboard his remaining 2 ships.
The return journey was not easy. Storms nearly sank the ships. During this voyage, he committed another cruel act. He forcibly took more Native Americans with him as slaves. The fate of these poor people was terrible. They were kept in very poor conditions on the ship. Due to cold, disease, and lack of food, several of the enslaved Native Americans died on the way. The few who survived were presented for exhibition in Spain.
He hadn't found much gold, but he brought back enough so that people in Spain who doubted his expedition could not mock him. He had some gold samples, some spices, tobacco leaves, some strange-looking vegetables like corn and potatoes, and those few Native Americans who were now being called Indians because Columbus still believed he had come from a region near India. His aim was to show that he had found a new world.
When he returned to Spain in March 1493, he made a grand claim. He announced that he had found the western route to Asia and that there was immense gold and wealth there. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain accepted his claims. Fulfilling their promise, they gave him the title Admiral of the Ocean Sea and bestowed other privileges upon him. Columbus became part of Spain's wealthy class overnight.
The question arises, what happened to the 39 men left at Fort Navidad? When Columbus returned a year later with his second, much larger expedition, he found the fort burned down and the bodies of all his companions. Investigations revealed that these men, in their greed for gold and women, had inflicted immense cruelty on the local population, as a result of which the local tribes united and killed them all.
And an even bigger question is, what was the future of the millions of native inhabitants of Hispaniola and other islands whom Columbus had encountered? How did this first contact, which began so peacefully, so quickly turn into destruction, slavery, disease, and genocide, erasing all traces of millions of Caribbean natives within just a few decades? The real story is perhaps that of the people who were already there and how their world turned into a living hell forever after the arrival of these heavenly guests. We will tell you all this in the 4th episode of American History.